BJ from Game Gumbo. I've got my guests here, Tory Brown and Kevin Bertram. Tory, the designer of Votes for Women, Kevin from Fort Circle Games. And it's time to talk about the big game, Votes for Women. Tory, it's your first game. What was it like seeing that game at Labyrinth? I saw that picture right there in the middle of Labyrinth. What was that like? And tell us about Votes for Women.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think I'm still in a bit of a state of disbelief. It is hard to believe that this game that was in my heart and in my head for years is actually on other people's tables and shelves. It has been, I didn't know what to expect from the release, and it has exceeded those wild non-expectations. So Votes for Women is a game about the American women's suffrage movement from 1848 to 1920 and the ratification of the 19th Amendment. In 2020, America celebrated the centennial of that amazing moment. And it seemed, and I read an article the year before about all of the planning. There was a commission. There was all of this stuff that was going to happen. And it seemed like a really great time to tell a story about this amazing movement to an audience that maybe, wouldn't have heard anything in history class and wouldn't, necessarily crack a nonfiction tome. So to reach a new audience with this great story, and and to coincide with the August 2020 moment of the centennial. Then the pandemic happened and everything sort of got turned upside down, which is great. I mean, no, the pandemic was terrible. I still own an apartment. But the time that we were able to spend on development, on research, on working it out, on having a bajillion people play test it and send us their thoughts and reactions and feedback, being able to incorporate that, being able to put 13 different historical documents together to include into the box has been, I think it really shows the care and the love that went into this game. It's primarily an area control game, card driven, and I'd say pretty, light strategy in a very nice way. It's certainly the heaviest game that a lot of my friends have ever played, but I make them play it because it's my game. The game is 1 to 4 player, 2-sided game. I think it plays best 1 versus 1, suffrage versus opposition. And, they each have their own deck, and you drive through history as you're pulling these cards, and you're encountering famous and not so famous people. You're encountering historical moments like the Civil War and then the 15th Amendment. You're encountering divisions in the suffrage movement. You're really feeling the story and feeling the push and pull that the suffrage movement went through as they were campaigning across the country and trying to get eventually the 19th Amendment passed through Congress. So there are 2 victory conditions for the game. Suffrage needs to put 6 columns into the congressional track, and then build power across 48 states, since that's all the states that there were. No offense, Alaska and Hawaii, I think you're great. This didn't exist in 1920 when the amendment was ratified. And suffrage needs 36 states, 3/4 of the states to ratify. That's what Article 5 says of the Constitution. So that's what we put into the rule book. And that means that
the conditions built in right there, right? Right out of the Constitution.
James Madison doing me a solid, helping me with the rule book.
If you look all the way in the back of the rule book, he's listed as a co-designer. James Madison.
His how to play videos are the best.
Yeah, Madison.
They are.
Hey, does anybody have a quill? We need to take the score down. We got to fill out the score pad.
Just have a parchment pad. Yeah. Opposition only needs 13 states. It's a lot easier to not do anything in America than to do things. I don't know if anybody had noticed that. But the asymmetrical play I find super fascinating. The decks are full of artwork and news clippings and primary source documents. The map is really pretty. I don't know. I really like it. I would love this game even if I didn't make it. So that's Votes for Women.
Yeah, I was actually trying to look for the cards. So, Kevin, what attracted you to this game? You remember how I told you that I'm not very good with prototypes. So I'm sure when you first saw it, it didn't have the Fort Circle treatment yet, right?
Well,
what attracted you to the game?
So normally, a designer works on a game and then sends it to a. That's some awesome background.
Nice one, Patrick. And his wife Dolly supplied the game night snacks. That's right.
Is actually Tory and I talked about the design before she started working on a design. And so I don't know when that was, Tory, maybe 2018. I mean, I know you had started 2019. Yeah. So Tory had started playing more games and getting interested. And, she's, deep into politics, understands it. She really enjoyed Watergate, really enjoyed 1960. And so, we had a conversation and, I think she had the idea and I started thinking about the idea a little bit too, because of 2020 was coming up. It's definitely, I'm not trying to take any of her glory, but this was a discussion we had. So there wasn't a prototype that just came to me. We talked about it and then she went to go to work for a prototype.
But she told Dan, you described it and you went, I'm in, right away.
Yeah,
what was that spark? What was that spark right away?
Well, so I like working with Tory. I mean, that's just that simple. And so she could have proposed most anything and I would have been excited about it. But then when, we have I think that, I don't mean to get too heavy about this, but I think that, historical, particularly wargaming, has always been sort of a male-dominated space. And the opportunity to maybe expand that a little bit also really, I thought was kind of a good thing to do, a good move. And it's also, I love 1960. I love political games anyways. And I knew that with Tory's depth in the history and her attention to detail and just, having worked with her in debate and then in the business world, I knew it was going to be a great project. So I was like, yeah, we got to do this. So
yeah, and Tory, I've heard the interviews. You don't shy away from the fact that this is a war / conflict / type of game, right?
Yeah, it is. I mean, 70 years, all of these states, all of these people, all of this back and forth. I mean, Inez Milholland died campaigning for suffrage, right? Body counts is apparently what we need for a war game, right? I do think, though, that nonviolent conflict, especially for political rights, it's important to have that kind of, that we understand that war isn't the only way things are settled, right? That there are processes, even as difficult and as daunting as something like a constitutional amendment, that the conflict here is worth understanding and is good gameplay, because it was not just the suffragists were like, yeah, we want to vote. And everybody was like, we don't think so. And they're like, no, we really do. And they're like, okay, right? It was resistance. It was mockery. It was winning and losing and winning again, right? And so you feel that as you're putting down the cubes on the map, this kind of was not unidirectional. It was not just happy-go-lucky momentum. It was fierce opposition at almost every turn, and that the tension of that comes through in the game is, I think, a testament to a lot of research to sort of get that history involved. And then I think, a lot of feedback from our playtesters. Jason Matthews, who was the designer of 1960 Making of a President, similar game uses the Electoral College as a sort of, the mechanical structure behind the game. We use just a sort of simple 3/4 to 1/4 count, constitutional amendment ratification. The input, the feedback that I got working with Kevin, working with folks to make the gameplay as smooth as it is was just a really gratifying process to have this, I've got this idea. And then all these people help me shine it into what is Votes for Women now.
Well, Steve and I love talking about history. I know Verla likes history, but we brought in a ringer. We've got Adam Mills, a friend of ours from the Chuck's group. And I want to bring Adam in because he's got some good questions for you, Tory. Are you ready for some, we do a lot of shtick on the show, Steve. But now we're going to bring an actual expert in. Welcome in, Adam.
Hello. Thank you for having me. I wouldn't necessarily say I'm an expert, though.
You're a teacher, though, and I am not. I do have a history degree, but I am not a teacher. And so, Adam, I appreciate you coming in. You've got some good questions for Tory and Kevin?
Yeah. So I am a special education high school history teacher who focuses on trying to bring games into the classroom as much as possible, and also share my love of gaming and convince other educators to use games in the classroom. I've been served on panels at PAX Unplugged and PAX East, New York Comic Con, discussing why games should be in the classroom. And one of the things that I like to focus on in my first question for you is through Votes for Women, and I guess, games in general, do you find it to be more impactful for a game to be designed through the lens of trying to teach the specific historical content, or to use historical content in games as a vehicle for more the supportive historical thinking and analysis skills?
I think that the way gameplay works, I think at one point really committed to, Arizona didn't become a state until 18 whatever, right? And Wyoming was the first state to have women vote in elections, if you don't count New Jersey, which we don't. And so I was really needed to adhere to chronology, and I just had to shake that loose. And so I think what we gave up in historical accuracy became an opportunity to think creatively and analyze history. So in the game, in the deck, you could play the 15th Amendment or even Reconstruction before the Civil War. And, maybe that's kind of weird, but maybe the 15th Amendment sparks the Civil War, right? Where enfranchising people from, as a constitutional amendment creates this strife. It can help us think about cause and effect, and that, we understand things happened in a certain order, but what if they didn't? So I think that I had to give up on just, teach the content in order to get to focus on the underlying forces of social change, of movement politics, of what it takes in our country to make things better for a lot of people. And I, essentially sacrifice what would have been a sort of, this is, and then this happened, and this happened, and then this happened, for what could happen. Because if we can think about what could have happened then, I hope students and players will think about what could happen next for us.
I think that's an amazing way to approach it. I find myself often, even before I began using games in the classroom, doing a lot of kind of what if, historical thought experiment type things with my students. And I think that, like you so eloquently put it, that does a great job of pushing students to not only think of, well, why wasn't it this way? And what are we going to do if it happens again? Or we are, faced with a similar type situation. Also, I love the inclusion of the primary sources. That's a great throw-in for a history teacher to be able to. And I'm also always trying to think of how to sell this to admin, and you can be like, no, it's not just a game. It's also, look, there's history. It's right there.
Yeah, there's how many pieces of I don't want to call it fluff. How many pieces of flavor are in there? It's like 13 or 15, right?
13 historical reproductions / tchotchkes, as I've also heard it referred to. And that was a fun project. Kevin said, this is important to Fort Circle. Give me 2 or 3 documents.
2 or 3.
And I think I gave 15, and we negotiated down to 13. But
my defense, no. In my defense, I was on your side on the number. It was my wife who was like, oh, this is too much and it's going to overwhelm people. And she now admits, one of the very few times she does, that she was wrong and we were right. I fully backed all of this being in
Kevin,
there.
there is going to be somebody out there that opens this box and goes, wait, it's one of those murder mystery games that we have to go through all the clues.
It was Susan B. Anthony in the
whole time.
I think I know the answer to this one already. I think I know the story how it came out.
And there's also one piece in there that actually was not from Tory, but that was from me,
really?
Which is a letter from the Standard. So the president of the Standard Guano Company was extremely upset that Emmeline Pankhurst was being allowed into the country. And so he wrote a nasty gram to President Wilson. And the reason I wanted that in the game is because we will be publishing a game probably in 2024 on the guano trade called Guano. And I like the fact that almost every game we have has it, or that we're planning, has a tie to another game. So like The Shores of Tripoli has Thomas Jefferson in it, who is also in the treason trial of Aaron Burr. And you have Frederick Douglass, who is in Votes for Women, is also in the Halls of Montezuma. So, right, like how there's these, even though these games are wildly different topics, there's these interconnections. And so this is the Guano letter is our connection to the Guano game to Votes for Women.
Adam, it's the FCU, also. Adam. It's the Fort Circle universe, right? I mean, it's the FCU. You got to go with that, Kevin. It's the FCU, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's going to end up taking up the back row of many classrooms.
Yeah. So this is one you could see using in a classroom, since 2 or 4 people could play. But Tory, to me, Adam could have people watching the game and enjoying it just as much. I like these kind of games because when you watch other people play games like this, you actually have just as much fun as the people playing, because it's sort of like a little movie you're watching, right?
It is. And you'd be like, hey, like, let me see that card. And you're looking over these documents. I've also played it 2-sided, where you could have a group of 4 or 5, right? Like having a group discussion about, do we play the event on the card? Do we campaign? Do we lobby? Do we organize? And so you're really sort of like weighing, like campaign, or like activists have to weigh. We have limited resources. We have a lot of decisions. What's our strategic advantage? There's math in the game, right? As you're considering what are average rolls versus what might be dictated on the card. And so I think that there's a lot of different options for, how you would focus. There's a school or a university in Indiana that like a class on progressive era history. And that professor used the game, I think, and again, divided the class into half, and they sort of worked on it together, which is amazing.
Yeah, that's, I mean, as you were talking, that's kind of exactly how I envisioned it. So I mean, again, kudos. My only other question was, and you kind of spoke to it there in terms of there's going to, there might be some math skills involved, definitely some group dynamic things happening if it's played in that way. But I guess I was wondering what kinds of skills, both in terms of game skills, game knowledge skills, and in terms of historical knowledge and thinking, do you think students would need to already possess in order to be successful and find enjoyment with this game? And then how might it lead to generalization of skills or for success in other content areas or other games?
I do think that you benefit as a player by having a basic understanding of the story. I think that I would, if I was going to teach with Votes for Women, that there would be an initial narrative that you grant, because I think, there are these strategic decisions, these calculations about not just, your choices about what to do with these cards, but there are 2 victory conditions: the congressional track and the map, the ratification map. And if you don't build enough power in Congress, you never get to the map. But if you build power in Congress too quickly, you get to the map and it really ties a lot of opposition's strength. So there's this like pivotal moment where you sort of a window, and like the window in history, where it became suddenly feasible to lobby Congress and to earn votes on the underlying legislation for the amendment. So the idea of timing, I think, would be like a helpful discussion about like the historical movement and then in gameplay. And I think that would be a skill or something that you would want to talk to students about. I do think that the understanding social forces, racism is a component of this game, because racism was a component of suffrage history, because racism is a component of American history. Xenophobia as well. And as immigrants are moving into the country, both suffragists and the opposition were using people's fear of immigrants to say, well, give us the vote, or don't give anybody the vote. We don't want, right. And so understanding, that power in this country has always sought to preserve itself and has used some really unsavory means to do so. I think is also then, if you intro it, play the game and say, okay, what happened when that xenophobia card or white supremacy in the suffrage movement came in and came about, I think, helps, I hope, understand again that like, protesters in 2020 didn't invent this thing called white supremacy and start complaining about it, right? It's been wedded through everything in this country, and that is why we need to be able to talk about it. And unless we can reckon with our past, we can never improve our future. Right? Again, this sort of forward-looking, what do we do? Who do we include? Because the suffrage movement very famously, or maybe not famously enough, did not want to include a lot of Black women in their struggle. Clubs were separate, right? There was this segregation even in the movement. And what could have been different if the suffragists had rejected that kind of segregation and white supremacy? What if, the movement itself in 1920 said, okay, we've done this amazing thing in the Constitution. What are we going to do in the South about Jim Crow laws and about voter suppression? And instead they just sort of like gave up or focused on the ERA. And so being able to talk openly about that, which I know not everybody can, not everybody lives in a state where we can be honest. And that's just how that is. But I think that there's, equipping students with facts, and helping them think about the present is really powerful.
Is that one? I have it on the screen up here. Is that one of the reasons, if I remember right, why you have both purple and gold colors for one side? In other words, the two forms of power that it was. Well, maybe tell the audience about that. Why you chose purple and gold? In other words, two distinct powers, whereas the other side only has one color cube to worry about.
Sure. The suffrage movement wasn't a monolith. There were disagreements over, issues of race. And the first big split comes in after the Civil War and the 15th Amendment, where the Constitution enshrines the right to vote for Black men. And people like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony are incensed. And Elizabeth Cady Stanton gets like real graphic about like, how dare you let these uneducated Black men vote, where I, this educated, wealthy white woman, am not allowed to do this, right? Susan B. Anthony takes a little bit more of like a what I would call like a palatable stance and says universal suffrage or nothing, right? Everyone in or none of us. But there are these underlying notions of the racism and that continues throughout, right? That these like beautiful, nice, happy white women can't vote, while look at all these like, drunks and criminals and Black people are allowed to vote. It's, it's quite a thing. So the purple and the yellow, it indicates that division in the movement, where they actually split into two different organizations and sort of went side by side until the late 1800s into the 1920s. But then in the 1910s, they split again, and there's more militant tactics, protesting in front of the White House, which then ends up with the arrests and force feedings and torture in prisons, which, state violence, yay, that doesn't still happen at all. And the purple and yellow were the colors of the suffrage movement. Purple representing loyalty, white representing purity, and yellow representing the light that shines the way. So
Gold.
Using gold. So using
gold.
Purple and gold, using the colors of the suffrage movement, because that's historically accurate, to represent these splits is, I think, visually really evocative. And then in gameplay, opposition can exploit these divisions, and if you aren't spreading out your resources equitably, then you can really get hamstrung in some places where you weren't prepared.
It's such a shock sometimes when someone plays that card and you've really got all of one color. You know, it can really hurt. So I love that. I love that idea. I think it was great. Yeah. Besides the fact that you chose purple and gold.
Purple and gold.
That's fantastic.
Purple and gold. Purple and gold.
Any other questions for the group on Votes for Women?
You were talking about this earlier on, both Kevin and Tory, about this being a kind of a war game. And to me, as we were playing it and doing a demo, it felt almost more like a siege game. Like there was a long, slow build of momentum towards something. And in the early stages, opposition is trying to throw up roadblocks and survive and camp out behind. But you're right, that the timing of that, the accumulating and spreading across the board, the momentum starts to shift. And then you have to pivot to saying, when can we get the amendment through? And then take it to ratification. Have we laid the groundwork across the states for ratification before we do? It really did feel like it was a long, slow building attack against the opposition. So while it was war, it felt to me like it was more of a castle siege, almost to some extent.
One of the local professional wargamers here in DC referred to it as an insurgency game, and I think there's a lot of truth to that. The opposition starts very strong, but they're kind of hollow, and this insurgency, the suffrage movement, has to take some time to build up power. But then, you know, in our game, hopefully, if you're the suffrage player, overcomes that entrenched power.
Right. The only other question I would have is related in a way to what Adam was talking about in terms of students' preparedness for this, or maybe even other gamers' preparedness for this. When you've got a game like this where there clearly seems to be a right side of history and a wrong side of history, how do you get people who are maybe not history buffs to feel comfortable playing a game where they're representing something that might be just repugnant to them and say, well, it's just a game? We tried it with that to just say that when we were doing the review, that it was going to have to immediately switch sides. You had to immediately play the other side just because you needed to see both. But I could see where some folks might only want to play against the Oppobot and never want to have to be anti-suffrage.
I learned the most from building the opposition deck. There isn't a lot of story or narrative around opposition to suffrage, right? We tell the story from one side, and there's all this abstraction, and, you know, they were just up against forces and up against, right, like, you know, patriarchy, and that was it. And so building out the suffrage deck was fascinating. It was hard, but it was important. You know, there are all these senators who are just saying these really noxious things, and I get to put all of them down at the bottom in the flavor text. I think, you know, we face similar struggles today, and we also face similar opposition to rights-based movements. And if we are ever going to overcome, and we are going to start expanding freedoms again, rather than just lose them, we need to understand our opposition. We can't just pretend that they are cartoon characters twiddling their mustaches, right? They cannot be caricatures. They are people and industries and financial and personal incentives that we must overcome in order to sort of do this whole more perfect union business. And so I think playing Votes for Women gives you a very soft entry into understanding the vast array of forces that were responsible for trying to stop the suffrage movement, including many people are very surprised that women opposed suffrage. It just never occurs to people that maybe some women, and it's not just like didn't want to vote, actively organized to stop all women from voting. And so that understanding is power. That understanding, yes, Rob, is, you know, and so I say all this in play it, understand it. And if you lose, like, losing as opposition is kind of a night. Like, if you hate losing, try as opposition.
Sure.
Also, or play the Oppobot. It's fine.
Yeah. Great answer. Thank you.
Okay, sure.
That's good points there. So Rob said, understanding both sides of any signing issue is key to understanding. That was a great idea to have a side swap to see the views through a larger lens for sure. You make it tough because in the game of Risk that most of my generation grew up on, we knew we weren't always going to be able to control America or control Australia, the turtle up strategy Australia. You had to play countries or areas that maybe not something that you would identify with, right? Maybe that weren't always on the right side of history, but they were so abstracted in Risk. This is not this, Steve. I think you'd agree with me. This doesn't feel like an abstract game at all. And Tory, kudos to you for doing that. It really felt like you're sweeping through history as you're going through the game. Now, I want to play the game more, or even watch people playing it, because, like you said, sometimes you do get caught up on just check marks and purple and gold cubes instead of that awesome flavor text you have. So it'd be fun to actually watch Steve and Verla play this and go at each other at ChuckCon, and then I can just kind of watch the movie.
You also get to know people in an odd kind of way. It was, where am I going to put these cubes? Oh, Ohio, like I hate that state, or like people tell you about themselves while they're playing. I'm from Michigan, so I got to make sure Michigan does my way. It's fascinating. I love it. I
didn't understand because I saw New York there, and I went right north, and I kept looking for Montreal, and I couldn't find it.
It's there.
So I thought maybe there's something wrong with the map. So
this anti-North bias of yours, BJ, you're showing your true colors, and they are not purple and gold. They are not purple and gold.
It's my ignorance. You get above the Potomac Canal, and I don't know what's going on up there. So I don't get up there enough. So yeah, fantastic. Patrick says, in the framework of a game, if he has to play the bad side, he's going to just play to win. Because essentially we are playing games. So we have to remember that, right, Tory?
That was my assumption. Kevin and I met as, in the debate community where you argue every issue from both sides and all of the sides. And that arguing that global warming is good for blah, 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 whatever the oil industry said is reason. It's just part of the game that you play. I've been surprised at how emotional people react to playing opposition. Maybe like you said, in a lot of, games where you're playing World War II or the Confederacy, it's abstract. You are moving tanks or drawing battle lines, and it's not about what's underneath all of that conflict. Votes for Women is it is about what's underneath. It's about the morality and our sense of justice. And I guess it's nice that people don't want to play opposition, but they should.
They should play both sides.
Or they can play the Oppo bot. It's fine, whatever.
Watergate is one of our favorite games. And look, you got to, you don't want to, but once you're playing, Nixon, it's not like at that point you feel like it. You just want to win, like in chess, right? You're just, you're playing chess. But at the same time.
Nixon's the good guy in that game.
yeah. That's
the baby that.
We'll have to duke that one out, Kevin. But that is the good thing is while you're playing the game, you're playing to win, as Patrick said. But you have the game, and you look at the game, and you study the game, and you look at the cards, and you can't help but pick up all the history behind it. So kudos, Tory. I think it's fantastic.
Thank you.
I think it's fantastic. Yeah. Any other questions? If not, this is a board game show, and you know what that means. Adam, are you hanging around for the board game show for the game part? You got to go.
I got to go. It's getting a little late here in New York, and I still have to teach tomorrow.
Yeah. All right.
Speaking of which, before Adam goes, I just dropped the link to Millsocracy, his site in there, and you'll know that you'll appreciate it that the tagline is teaching through geekery since 2005.
Love it.
So.
Well, Adam, thanks. We played games together. It's funny, but we've never actually met, so it's nice to have you on the show here. And thank you for the very thoughtful questions.
Thank you, and I can't wait to get my hands on a copy. Thanks.
Oh. The Gumbo bump. Did you hear that, Kevin?
Here it is.
Ching.
All right. Thanks, Adam. We'll see you later.
Thank you. Have a great night, everyone.
Good night.
See you, Adam.
All right. Patrick Newman checking out too. Thank you for all the great questions, Patrick. And Wayne, you got to check this out. You will never be disappointed by the bling you get in a Fort Circle game. And you get the bonus, fantastic gameplay. So.